I'm not sure how well organized my thoughts are for this afternoon's teaching. But given this whole kind of area of practice that we started to explore this morning, sort of just investigating, inquiring, allowing the process of exploring experience to unfold moment by moment. And I figured maybe my thoughts don't need to be so organized. And, I can let's see how they organize themselves, if indeed they do, as we explore. In terms of our inquiry, then, in terms of the investigation of a contemplative life, of Dharma practice, we might then ask, what essentially are we inquiring into? What are we exploring? And we might answer that by saying, the nature of the self, or the nature of reality, or the nature of experience, or the nature of everything, or the nature of consciousness. And we could probably smush all those together as actually being one essential inquiry. To inquire into the nature of self is to inquire into the nature of reality. Because, what can we ever know of reality other than the way it's perceived? And where is it perceived? Oh, here. Who is it perceived by? It's harder to say, but usually we say it's me. So I might use all of those words somewhat interchangeably, but I'll probably speak about just the exploration of, or the inquiry into, the nature of consciousness or awareness. Maybe as a start, we might just try to disambiguate those two terms a little bit. And maybe before that even, to say, it may be that some of what I'm saying seems a little abstract, maybe a little complicated, a little elusive, a little weird, I don't know. That the intention isn't to generate some complicated or clever ideas, right? Not at all. The interest is for us to just see if we can just kind of keep checking in real time with the fact of being here, being conscious, being aware, and seeing what relationship you may or may not have to what's being explored or suggested. We could imagine a kind of spectrum that maybe at its most basic we might call reality, or let's call it life. What we talk about, life in the biggest sense. The universe is alive, or the mystery actually that there is life. And some idea we have, well, actually many different ideas, all of the sort of big systems posit some kind of way in which life came into being. The big systems meaning the religions, right? They're pretty big systems. The big systems around which human beings have orientated some sense of belief, some ways of which we derive meaning about our place in the universe. And I'd include in that the big system of science as well, which actually, even though it claims to be a kind of anti-religion or opposite to religion, actually functions in somewhat of a similar way, right? It also has an origin story. So we might be familiar more with the biblical origin story, 7 days, God creating things, etc. Or we might be more at home with a scientific origin story, Big Bang, etc. So God created life, or life emerged out of Brahma's navel, or through the churning of the cosmic oceans, or from the Big Bang. Or we just say life is here and it's quite mysterious what it is. Who knows where it came from? But here we are. Here's this unbelievably alive reality, this unbelievably alive universe. Everywhere, all we can find in every direction is life. It's so far, hopefully, pretty undeniable. Everything is life in the largest sense. We don't accord life to everything. We talk about inanimate objects. So what do we mean by an inanimate object? Something that isn't alive. Like, what about a rock? A rock, it's definitely, I mean, we can't say it's not part of life. Of course it is. And yet we probably wouldn't say it's alive. Though I listened to a very interesting podcast once. In fact, I sent it to some of you. It was an edition of The Emerald, which was all about talking rocks. And the idea that, there's this sort of deep traditions, like with the Shiva Lingam and all in India, of people kind of worshipping rocks, and how sort of primitive and animistic that seems. And yet, what is this other than a talking rock? This, it's not, you say, well, this is an inanimate object, this phone. But it's literally rock. I mean, it's quartz, it's minerals. And wow, we definitely accord it a lot of life. But okay, let's put aside phones as talking rocks. So on that spectrum, right, from everything being life, including what we call inanimate objects, there's a sort of upgrade to sentience. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay. So we could debate the sentience of rocks, but we won't. You may have sometimes, some sense of a relationship with the rock. People accord various qualities to certain kinds of rocks, right? Like crystals, for example. So we could hold it in a sort of light or agnostic way, maybe. But when we talk about sentience, we're really talking about the overlap into things that, well, what's the definition of sentience? Sort of the capacity to take in, right? Sentience, being sentient, having senses, the capacity to take in what's happening and to respond to what's happening. And if we wonder about plants, I mean, plants, in the usual sense, plants aren't really included in sentience. But if you really hang out with trees, for example, as well as actually if you study, what's going on with trees, even scientifically, they're definitely responding to their environment and they're communicating with one another in some way. So it's like, oh, we just, we can feel sometimes maybe that within just plant life, something going on. So sentience, sort of, some of these places are a little unclear where we draw the line between just life and sentience. And you may have your own kind of intuition about that. It may be like, of course plants are sentient. Or it may be, no, that's too much. Sentience seems to me to start somewhere around chicken or whatever. So, okay, plants to animals. Now there's pretty much no doubt that they're sentient. Right? And of course, there's more and less complex organisms, but sentient. What we talk about in the tradition is sentient beings. Sense of the well-wishing for and the sensitivity to and the kinship with all sentient beings. So I've gone from life to sentience, even though there isn't a hard and fast line when you go from one to the other. And then we get consciousness. So what's the difference between sentience and consciousness? One of the definitions that gets given around to consciousness is there's subjectivity. Right? There's some sense of an inner sense of what it's like to be that being. And again, it's not like there's a hard and fast line. And it depends on the model. And maybe at this point I just mentioned that we might find ourselves operating out of two different and actually diametrically opposed models, which we could call the scientific model and the spiritual model. It's a bit clumsy, maybe. We could also, I don't really like to divide things into East and West, but we kind of could call them Eastern model and Western model as well. And they're diametrically opposed because the scientific model, or the materialist model, materiality is primary. And consciousness is an emergent property from materiality. But it's also posited with human consciousness. And it's sort of the mysterious gap. Like at some point, life, blind, unconscious life, just became conscious. Consciousness just somehow, in a mysterious way, emerged out of materiality. And in moment to moment, or in a human life, consciousness emerges out of the materiality of having a brain. Right? Consciousness is a byproduct of brain function. That's the model. But then the spiritual model, let's say, I don't really like that appellation, but never mind, is exactly the opposite. Consciousness is primary, and materiality emerges out of consciousness. No, consciousness is the origin out of which trees grow, humans come into being, and in fact, everything happens. And again, you might have a more affinity with one or the other of those models. It might just seem like it makes sense to you that materiality is primary, that there's a sort of a universe that sort of evolved. And first there was life, and then it became sentience, and then emerged into consciousness. Or it might make more sense the other way around, that no, consciousness is the absolute background condition for the emergence of anything at all. Fine either way, but I think it's worth just spending a little time seeing which of those seems like your orientation, and maybe having, whichever your orientation is, some degree of doubt and wonder about it. So, consciousness, wherever we draw that line, I hang out with my cat, I would say, Priya's conscious. And I would include within the definition of consciousness not just a subjective experience, but some kind of range of emotionality. And capacity not just to take in and respond to an environment in an instinctual way, but some kind of feeling. If you've hung out with dogs and cats or horses or the other types of animals that we humans tend to have a close relationship with, it's pretty obvious that they have some kind of feeling life, right? They get sad. They grieve when they lose other animals that they're close to. They get excited. They can be loving. And the nature of that interiority or subjectivity is we don't really know what it's like. We can pretty confidently determine that there's some interiority and some subjectivity there, some consciousness there. But I have no idea what it's like to be Priya. And of course, I've also no idea what it's like to be you, which is kind of wild. That we've really no idea what it's like to be each other. And that's actually one of the defining features of consciousness, is that there's an interior dimension to it that cannot be known from the outside. There's and quite a degree of sophistication and complexity and all. And so we each find ourselves kind of living this interiority, living inside this consciousness. And most of which we don't know really very much about. We know about quite a lot about the things that happen inside of consciousness. We know about what I think and what I want and where I'm going. And sometimes we don't know those things either, right? But you know, we don't know much about the origins of consciousness. We can't. We don't know much about the dimensions of consciousness. There's that lovely line in the Bhagavad Gita. Brahman is not comprehended by the mind. Brahman is that by which the mind comprehends. Most essentially, we want to know something about consciousness, but if you want to know something about anything, you have to be able to look at it and examine it. But you can't really look at consciousness and examine it because it's consciousness that's doing the looking. Except somehow there's this really cool thing called meditation. And it's not exactly like you can just look at consciousness, right? Because it's still consciousness that's doing the looking. And yet, somehow, you can enter into the fact and the directness of consciousness in a way that sort of turns up the brightness. And that we call awareness. And then we've got this sort of continuum: life, sentience, consciousness. And we could add, various features of that, like cognition and intelligence. But, I don't want to get into all of that, even though it's sort of fascinating. And then awareness. And the differentiating factor there is that within the realm of awareness, we start to actually take charge of the process. We didn't decide to go from sentience to consciousness. Maybe one could say we didn't really decide to go from consciousness to awareness. We just somehow, because it doesn't happen to everyone, right? In fact, it doesn't happen to most people. But it's somehow, or you and me, we became so amazed / perplexed / troubled / confused about the fact that we're here and that we're conscious and there's all this stuff going on, that we decided to intervene. And we took up practices and reflections and teachings and explorations that allow us to get closer to and be more intimate with the fact of being conscious. And then where that emergence of awareness, this brightened consciousness, this not quite enhanced consciousness, but this consciousness in which we're sort of building a relationship with the fact of being conscious. then we get to see, well, what shows up here? What does the light of awareness reveal? And partly what it reveals is the contents of consciousness. I think, did we talk about manas and vijnana and chitta the other day? I think, yeah. So part of what awareness reveals is the content of consciousness, the manas, the activity of consciousness, thinking and feeling and the impulses, etc. The stuff of me and my. And we get to learn about ourselves, not just learn about ourselves, but actually we get to see what's helpful about the activities of in consciousness and what's unhelpful. We get to actually, generate some discernment about what to develop and what to ignore and what to actively turn away from, for example. Sometimes that's called self-development, which in a psychological context makes sense. In Buddhist context, sounds like a bit of a misnomer, but okay. I would say in some ways, even though that is, knowing oneself better, understanding one's fears and foibles better, is of really good help to us. But in a certain way, it's also kind of secondary. It's like a happy byproduct of Dharma practice, rather than being the main focus. So there's lots that we could say about that. And there's lots of Dharma practice and teachings that might help us make better sense of that and feel more free in this personality, feel more accepting of this personality, and have more wisdom that can infuse this personality, and therefore to get into less trouble with this personality and make less trouble for others with this personality. And then there's also that realm that awareness reveals that isn't so much the stuff of me and my, it's more something that feels a little more essential. This isn't about my experience, it's more about the nature of experience. We started to speak about that this morning, right? And just attending to momentariness. Momentariness isn't just something that happens to me. It's not my momentariness. No, he says, oh, this is something that belongs to life and all the categories. It belongs to consciousness, it belongs to sentience, it belongs to life, it belongs to everything. So, awareness reveals the contents of consciousness, and while also revealing the features of consciousness, like momentariness, and also revealing in some way that's hard/impossible to articulate the fundamental nature of consciousness. So I say that it's hard to articulate, but of course, as soon as I say that reveals the fundamental nature of consciousness, then we start to think, hopefully, so what is the fundamental nature of consciousness? What is the fundamental nature of consciousness? In some ways, that momentariness takes us importantly close to something. Certainly, all the manas, all the mind activity, just momentary. All the sense data, just momentary. All the thoughts and feelings, just momentary. All the conceptions about me, just momentary. Even the conceptions about the way I seem to endure over time, just momentary. So the mind, the activity of consciousness might be quite accessible to see. It's just momentary, just like we said the other day, just a little bit more than nothing at all. Tiny bit more than nothing at all. So momentary, so fleeting, so insubstantial that it can't be grasped, it can't be found. That's what this term emptiness or goneness is pointing to, the fleetingness, the unfindability of all this momentary experience. And then what about the vijnana? Right? So not the activity of consciousness, but the knowingness of consciousness. In the tradition, in the way experience is broken down, vijnana is also sort of seen as momentary. It arises in conjunction with the experience. It can't be found separate from the experience. So there's a moment of seeing, and the sight connects with the sense door, and it's known. And maybe some of you have done some of the practices that involve attending so finely in meditation to moment by moment flickering experience, and a way in which time sort of opens up in that kind of state, and we feel like we can actually track the momentary firing of what we might, in a more materialistic view, call the firing of neurons. What in more Buddhist language we might call the appearing of mind moments. And while vijnana can be sort of broken down into its momentariness, we also experience this knowing of consciousness in a way that doesn't feel momentary. It feels like, hold on, there's just knowing. Okay, the experience is coming and going. But is the knowing? I was once on a retreat, sitting in a small group with the teacher. We were talking about our experience, going on about what was happening for me in meditation, etc. And the teacher said, so, everything in your experience is changing. What's not changing? And it really stopped me in my tracks. I said to her, well, knowing of the experience. And it was incredibly alive and important and paradigm shifting. Oh, everything's changing. I've been hearing that every retreat. Everything's changing. Everything's changing. What's not changing? What's not changing? You don't have to get into it ontologically, philosophically, metaphysically, whether or not the knowing is changing, just experientially. We can rest in knowing in a way that feels permanent would be the wrong word, but in a way that feels trustworthy, available. There's a sort of unchanging quality to awareness. If we think about it, we say, well, of course it changes, because there are environments when I'm not aware. But then you're off into the imagined or the figurative. Don't worry about some other moment when you can imagine or remember awareness changing right here and right now. What's changing? Everything. What's not changing? Hmm. Is this the whisper of the changeless? It's one of my favorite Zen stories I was telling in Korea a couple of weeks ago. Two monks meet on the path. One says to the other, "Where are you going?" Sounds like an anodyne kind of question. Where are you going? But in the tradition, where are you going is a pokey kind of question, challenging kind of question. Still these days in India, the sadhus, the kind of wandering yogis in India, would sometimes use that as a challenge question to each other. Where are you going? So two monks meet on the road. One says to the other, "Where are you going?" The other replies, "To an unchanging place." To an unchanging place. And the first says, if it is unchanging, how can there be any going? The second replies, going is also unchanging. I don't know. Every time I ever tell that story, I sort of put it out there, and I don't know what anyone does with it. You know, it may be very inspiring, it may be very confusing, it may just sound like nonsense. I don't know. I really love that little thing. What might that mean? Going to is unchanging. Everything's changing. Everything's changing. But if all we've got is everything's changing, we're kind of buffeted by that. There's nothing more changing than going, moving. And yet, in the going means also in the breathing, in the thinking, in the perceiving, in the everything. Is it possible that going also can be rooted in the unchanging? In the total, in the imperturbable. So, on the one hand, the knowingness, this knowingness that illuminates our experience, is momentary, of course, and yet it sort of has a dual nature. It's both momentary and unchanging. If that can be a feature of our practice, feeling for the amidst the undeniable constancy of change, everything's changing. Can we feel for the unchanging? And if we can't feel for, can we just inquire? What about that question as our inquiry? Everything's changing. What's not changing? And then we have this other feature of consciousness. So there's the activity of consciousness, there's the knowingness of consciousness, and then, well, we've spoken about chitta as this field of consciousness. And that can, it's a field that seems to have its origin here, certainly has its availability here. It's, and we might talk about chitta as a sort of personal consciousness. Again, we're on shaky ground here, but this whole talk is on shaky ground, so let's not worry about that. The shaky ground right now is personal consciousness and universal consciousness. Very tricky terms. I don't like either of them really. And yet, just experientially, we can have a sense of, yeah, well, this, we might have ideas of not self, we might have experiences of the kind of the dissolution of the sense of self. So well, consciousness isn't personal in that sense. And yet, well, okay, we might say, this is not me. It's not anybody else. It has a personalness to it, right? This consciousness is shaped by the experiences of this organism. Right? What this body has known and felt and shrunk around and opened to. What this mind has registered and been formed by and developed appreciation of or fear of, etc. It doesn't have to be infused with me and my to recognize that there's a personalness to this. This chitta, even though it's edgeless and it has this dimension where I don't need to claim or identify with it. It's uniquely personal. Uniquely personal. And the recognition that it's uniquely personal allows us to give a certain kind of love, actually, and also just respect and interest to that which has been through this organism, that which impinges in the moment on this organism. Yet at the same time, a sense of chitta, a sense of this field of experience that feels way, way bigger than me, way, way bigger than the personal, way more inclusive than just what I have felt and known, experienced, etc. There's different terms for that sort of universal consciousness in the tradition. In the Pali tradition, it's called bhavanga. Bhavanga, bhav, like becoming. Bhavanga means like constantly becoming, constantly flowing. Would be another way. So that sense that there's a we could just say a life force to consciousness. It's a constant generativeness. Now that's the quality that we might sense when we sit among trees and we listen to birds and we wonder, well, what makes the trees grow? What makes the planets turn? What makes the birds sing? What makes this heartbeat? Of course, we can't answer that, or we have recourse to a sort of scientific understanding, etc. But really, what makes it's bhavanga. It's this effulgence. Consciousness is on. It's animated. Whether we look outside to that which is growing as bamboo and shining as sun and flowing as river, whether we look inside to that which is beating as heart and feeling and being impacted. There's a kind of unstoppable bhavanga, an unstoppable dynamism to consciousness. One of the questions that people like to ask Buddhists is around about rebirth. You do this practice. Do you believe in reincarnation? Rebirth? Is there, what do you think then? Is there life after death? Which life? What was there life before? It's funny. Well, yes, of course there was life before birth. Like, hello, before I was born, everything seemed to have been going, life was going along fine. Now I'm born, life's going along. After I die, life would definitely carry along fine. All those other countless billions and billions of people who've died, was there life after their death? Yes, life carries on fine. But of course, that's not what we mostly mean. What we mean is there is there my life after death? Will there be my life after my death? Which is a strange kind of question to ask, really, especially, and it shouldn't be any stranger than for people involved in Buddhist practice. Because if we're not at all convinced by the sense of self here and now in this life, why on earth are we preoccupied with a sense of self when body and mind is gone? So if you find yourself perplexed by ideas about rebirth, I would say without 100% confidence, yes, there's life after death. And this is the evidence of it. Life and death is constant. Everything is constantly coming and going. Beings are constantly being born and then dying. Life is bhavanga. Right? Yeah. Life is in the bamboo and in the sunshine and in